The twin moons of Valuna hung low in the violet sky, casting pale ribbons of silver light across the bioluminescent flora that thrived in the deep valley of Avarice. The air shimmered with drifting motes of luminous pollen, and the river, winding through the gorge like a liquid galaxy, whispered its eternal lullaby to the quiet world. Elaya sat by the water's edge, her fingers grazing the smooth surface of a crystalline stone, her mind filled with words she could never speak. Her people, the Lyrevian, had no patience for silence. They spoke through symphonies of harmonized tones, their voices a chorus that weaved emotions into tangible reality. And yet, she, Elaya, daughter of the elder scribe, was born mute. No song had ever passed her lips, and for that, she was an outcast. But what her voice lacked, her gift compensated. With a mere thought, she could shape light itself, bending it into intricate patterns that hung in the air like frozen lightning. She could weave entire stories from shifting prisms of color, create ephemeral sculptures that pulsed with life. Yet to the Lyrevian, this was an aberration, not an art. "You are broken," they had told her. "You cannot sing. You do not belong." And so, she had been cast away to the valley, exiled from the luminous halls of her kin. Here, in solitude, she sculpted light into visions only she could understand, until the day she found him. Or rather, the day he found her. Marcus Caldwell stumbled through the undergrowth, his breath ragged, his body bruised from the crash. His ship was a broken carcass of metal and flame a mile behind him, smoldering in the endless twilight of this alien world. He had no way to contact Earth, no idea if anyone would come looking. The planet had not even been marked as habitable on his charts. And yet, there was beauty here, an otherworldly, ethereal beauty that made his artist's soul ache. The trees glowed from within, their veins pulsing like fireflies trapped beneath glass. The rivers shimmered, their waters reflecting colors no human eye had names for. But it was the girl who truly stunned him. She stood in the clearing by the river, her skin the deep obsidian of the night sky, marked with iridescent patterns that moved like constellations. Her silver eyes held no fear, only a quiet curiosity. And around her, the air sang, not with sound, but with light. Shapes flickered into existence before her, spinning nebulas of gold and violet, shifting forms that told stories without words. A creature of stardust, a city built upon floating spires, a great rift in the sky. A mute symphony, played for no one but herself. Marcus, battered and exhausted, could only whisper, "My God, that's beautiful." Elaya had never seen a human before. She had only heard the elders speak of them. Fragile, primitive beings who could not sing, who did not belong. But here was one before her, his skin burned by the sun, his clothing torn and covered in ash. His dark eyes were wide with wonder, not disgust. When he stepped closer, Elaya did not run. Instead, she reached out and let a new pattern bloom in the air, a swirl of gold and sapphire, curving toward him like a question. Marcus hesitated. Then, moving slowly, he knelt on the ground and picked up a charred stick from a fallen tree. He dragged its blackened tip across the smooth surface of a pale stone, sketching rough, uncertain lines. A crude sun, a ship, a stick figure, himself, standing beneath an alien sky. Then he looked at her, waiting. Elaya understood. A flick of her fingers, and the light shifted. Her answer took form. A glowing figure, its hands outstretched to the stars, longing, searching. Marcus grinned. "We can understand each other." It was the first time anyone had ever tried. Days passed, then weeks. Marcus, stranded and hopelessly out of place in this luminous world, spent his time alongside Elaya. They built a language between them, light and shadow, color and charcoal. She painted the sky with luminescence. He carved images in stone. But as their bond deepened, Marcus saw the weight behind Elaya's eyes, the sorrow she never spoke. He saw the way her shoulders tensed when distant songs echoed from the mountains, the way her hands trembled when she tried to shape images of her past. The exile was a wound that would never heal, unless... An idea struck him. Marcus was no scientist, but he was an engineer, and he had salvaged enough from his wreck to construct something rudimentary. He spent long nights in the wreckage of his ship, welding together circuits, programming frequencies. When he finally brought it to her, his hands were shaking. A small device, no larger than his palm. He gestured for her to try. Elaya hesitated, then raised her fingers. Light bloomed, and the device hummed. A soft, melodic tone filled the air, translating color into sound. Her eyes widened. She tried again, this time weaving a shimmering shape of swirling blues and silvers. The device interpreted it as a soft, choral note, rich and layered. For the first time, the silence in Elaya's world was broken. For the first time, she spoke. Word spread. It wasn't long before the Lyrevian came for her. Figures of towering grace, their luminous robes flowing like liquid moonlight. They stood on the cliffs above the valley, their eyes filled with the cold light of judgment. You were cast from our halls, the elders intoned, their voices weaving in perfect harmony. Why do you return? Elaya stepped forward, lifting the device to her lips. And she sang, not with her voice, but with her light, woven into sound, translated into a melody so haunting, so pure, that even the chorus of the elders faltered. The air filled with color and sound, merging into something new, something that had never existed before. A new song. Her song. Marcus watched from the valley below, his heart pounding. Would they accept her? Or would they shun her once more? The silence that followed stretched unbearably long. Then, the elder scribe, the one who had banished her, spoke. You have changed. Elaya's luminous eyes met theirs, unyielding. So have you. The elders stood motionless, their luminous robes shimmering in the twilight air. Around them, the gathered Lyrevian murmured in hushed tones, their harmonized voices carrying an undercurrent of unease. Elaya's song still echoed in the valley, a haunting reverberation of light and sound that had never before existed in the world of the Lyrevian. She had sung, not in their way, not through the perfect symphonies of their kind, but through her own means. The elder scribe, her own father, narrowed his glowing silver eyes. You wield unnatural forces, child, he said, his voice carrying a discordant note, rare among the Lyrevian. This is not our way. Elaya's fingers clenched around the small device Marcus had made for her. Our way, she repeated, her voice, a voice, rising through the hum of the translator. You mean your way. You cast me out because I could not sing as you do, but I have found another way to speak. I have proven that I am not broken. Murmurs spread like ripples in a still pond. Some of the younger Lyrevians stepped closer, curiosity flickering in their luminous eyes. Never had they heard such a sound. Never had they seen light transmuted into melody. The elder scribe's expression darkened. You disrupt our harmony. And yet, you listened, Elaya countered. For a moment, there was silence. Then, an elder to the right, an older Lyrevian woman with flowing hair that glowed like the river at dusk, tilted her head. Let her sing again, she said softly. The elder scribe's gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. You would have us entertain this aberration, Alaris? Alaris, an elder of high standing, did not flinch. I would have us hear it. She speaks in a way that is foreign to us, but I felt her song. I heard something new. Whispers. More murmurs. The elder scribe's face was carved from stone, unreadable. Then, he lifted his hand, and the others fell silent. Sing, he commanded. Elaya hesitated. Her father had never once asked her to perform, only judged her for what she lacked. But now, under the weight of their collective gaze, she knew this was her only chance. Slowly, she lifted her hands. Light gathered at her fingertips, swirling in brilliant fractals of color. She shaped a melody into the air, deep indigos and shifting golds, hues that wove together into a sound both melancholic and defiant. The translator hummed, transforming the light into an eerie, wordless song. A chorus of harmonies, unlike anything the Lyrevian had ever created, filled the valley. It was raw, imperfect, but powerful. A new symphony. Some of the younger Lyrevian gasped. A few clutched at their chests, as if feeling something they could not name. But the elder scribe's expression did not soften. Instead, his gaze slid past Elaya, to Marcus. This human has corrupted you, he said coldly. Marcus stiffened. He had kept his distance until now, letting Elaya fight her own battle, but he would not let her stand alone. Corrupted? He said, stepping forward. All I did was help her be heard. Isn't that what your people value most? You meddle in what you do not understand, the elder scribe said. You are an intruder, an outsider. Marcus exhaled sharply, forcing down his frustration. I might be an outsider, but Elaya is not. He turned to the gathered Lyrevian, his voice steady. She was born here. She is one of you. She found a new way to speak, not just for herself, but for all of you. And you're too afraid to listen. The air grew heavy with tension. Alaris watched Marcus thoughtfully, then turned to the elder scribe. Perhaps we should not dismiss this so quickly. But the elder scribe's face remained a mask of cold resolve. This is not our way, he repeated. Then, his voice dropped into a tone that sent chills through Elaya's spine. And for disrupting our harmony, there must be consequences. Elaya barely had time to react before two Lyrevian warriors stepped forward, their silver eyes unreadable. Marcus moved instinctively, placing himself between them and Elaya. Oh, hell no. You're not taking her anywhere. The elder scribe ignored him. His gaze bore into Elaya's. You were exiled once. You have defied that sentence. Elaya's heart pounded. You want to cast me out again? No, he said. I offer you a choice. The valley seemed to still. You will destroy that device and abandon this aberrant form of speech, the elder scribe said, his tone absolute. You will return to the halls of our people, and you will live as you should, in silence. Or you will be cast out permanently, never to return. Elaya's breath caught. Return, but never speak again. Or leave, forever. Her hands trembled. The weight of the choice pressed down on her, suffocating. She had spent years yearning to belong, aching to be seen. Now, the chance was in front of her, but at what cost? She looked at Marcus. He shook his head. No, you don't have to choose this. They don't deserve your silence. The elder scribe's expression hardened. Choose. Elaya closed her eyes. Her whole life, she had tried to mold herself into something her people would accept. She had swallowed the pain of their rejection, hoping for a day when they would finally see her worth. But now, she realized, she had been waiting for them to change. They never would. She opened her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the translator to her lips. Light bloomed, cascading in brilliant streaks of sapphire and gold. And she sang. Not for them. For herself. The elder scribe's face twisted in anger. So be it. The warriors advanced. Marcus grabbed Elaya's hand. Run. They bolted into the valley. Behind them, the Lyrevian voices rose in discordant fury, a chorus of rejection. Light flashed, bolts of raw energy streaking past them, searing into the ground. The Lyrevian were not violent by nature, but they had exiled her once, and they would do so again, by force if necessary. Marcus yanked Elaya behind a ridge, his mind racing. They had no ship, nowhere to go. The valley was a cage, and the Lyrevian would hunt them until they were gone. But Elaya's eyes burned with a fierce light. She turned to Marcus, gripping his hands. The colors swirling around her intensified, twisting into something new, something unstable. Marcus's breath caught. Elaya, what are you? She pressed her palm to his chest. And then, light engulfed them both. The world shifted, and they were gone. The sensation was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. One moment, his feet were pounding against the bioluminescent earth of the valley. The next, he was weightless, suspended in a tunnel of shifting light. Colors bent and folded around him, impossible hues flickering past in chaotic waves. It felt as if the universe itself was unraveling and rewinding at the same time. Then, impact. Marcus hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. The world around him spun violently before settling into eerie stillness. He groaned, rolling onto his side, blinking through the afterimages of raw luminescence still seared into his vision. The landscape was different. Gone were the rolling twilight forests and silver-lit rivers of avarice. Now, he lay on a smooth, obsidian plain beneath a sky darker than any night he had ever known. The horizon stretched endlessly, illuminated only by drifting clusters of floating crystal formations that pulsed softly, like the embers of a dying fire. Elaya knelt beside him, her silver eyes burning with intensity. You moved us, Marcus breathed, staring at her in shock. She nodded, her luminous markings still flickering with unstable energy. She looked just as stunned as he felt. She hadn't meant to do it. The Lyrevian had always used their voices to shape the world around them, to create harmony that resonated with their surroundings. But Elaya had done something entirely different. She hadn't just shaped light. She had become it, bending reality itself. Marcus exhaled sharply. Where the hell are we? Elaya glanced around, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. Then, lifting her hands, she summoned a soft glow, weaving a swirling image of the valley they had just left. The glowing map rippled, showing the location they were now, far beyond the mountains, in a place untouched even by the Lyrevian. Marcus swallowed. You teleported us? She hesitated, then nodded. Marcus let out a slow, disbelieving chuckle. Damn, you really don't do anything by halves, do you? Elaya tilted her head, eyes questioning. It means you're incredible, Marcus clarified, grinning despite the situation. Elaya's expression softened. But the moment was short-lived, because in the distance, a ripple of movement caught her eye, and it was coming toward them. Elaya pulled Marcus to his feet as the air around them began to shift. Shapes emerged from the darkness, figures, tall and gaunt, their bodies cloaked in the same eerie glow as the floating crystals above. Their eyes were hollow pools of light, their elongated fingers moving in slow, deliberate gestures. Marcus tensed. Friends of yours? Elaya shook her head. A low hum vibrated through the ground, resonating deep in Marcus's bones. The figures stopped a few paces away, observing them with an unsettling stillness. Then, one of them raised a hand, and light rippled outward, forming a spiral of golden symbols in the air. They were speaking, but not in words. This was something else. Elaya's eyes widened. What are they saying? Marcus asked, unable to decipher the glowing script. She hesitated, then carefully raised her own hands, crafting a response in her own light-formed symbols. The figures tilted their heads in unison. A long silence stretched between them before one of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward and, with a slow flick of its wrist, conjured a single glowing sigil. One word. Exiled. Elaya stiffened. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine. Wait, are they talking about you? Elaya didn't answer. Instead, she turned back to the figures, forming another pattern of light in the air. The tallest figure responded immediately. More symbols. Like us. Marcus inhaled sharply. Wait, they were exiled too. Elaya's fingers trembled as she wove her next question. Who are you? For the first time, the figures moved in unison, stepping closer. Their reply formed in the air, glowing with an intensity that sent a shiver through both of them. The first singers. Elaya's breath hitched. Marcus watched as her entire body went rigid, her glowing patterns shifting wildly in response to what she had just read. Okay, I'm missing something big here, Marcus muttered. Who the hell are the first singers? Elaya turned to him, her expression conflicted. Slowly, she formed a small glowing image, a group of Lyrevian, but their features were different. Their markings shone more intensely, and instead of singing through perfect harmonies, their voices erupted in jagged bursts of light. The images shifted, these beings creating magnificent structures, shaping entire landscapes with their raw power. But then, another group of Lyrevian appeared, more refined, more uniform. The first singers were outnumbered, banished, silenced. Marcus exhaled. So let me get this straight. The Lyrevian weren't always like they are now. Elaya nodded. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, piecing it together. Your people, they erased an entire part of their history. The first singers weren't just exiled, they were forgotten. The tallest figure nodded. More symbols formed in the air. We were too many. Our voices were chaos. The elders sought only harmony. Marcus clenched his fists. They called you an aberration. But it was their ancestors who erased their own kind. Elaya lowered her hands. The truth settled over her like a heavy weight. She had always thought she was alone, a singular anomaly, a mistake. But she wasn't. She was part of something older, and maybe something more powerful. The figures stepped closer, and the lead one raised a hand. Another ripple of symbols emerged. You have awakened your gift. You are one of us. Elaya's hands trembled as she absorbed the words. Marcus watched her carefully. Elaya, you okay? She turned to him, her silver eyes searching his. For so long, she had been cast out, forced to wander alone, forced to accept that she would never belong. But now, she had found the lost ones, the ones who had been cast out before her. She had a choice. Stay with them. Learn what had been stolen from her. Embrace the power the elders had tried to bury. Or leave. Return to the human who had given her a voice, even when she had none. Marcus swallowed hard, seeing the conflict in her face. "You don't have to stay here," he said softly. "You can make your own way." Elaya hesitated. The first singers lifted their hands in unison, forming a final message in the air. "Stay. Become what you were meant to be." She looked back at Marcus. He forced a smile. "I'll go wherever you go." Elaya closed her eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she made her choice. Elaya stood between two worlds. Behind her, Marcus, the human who had given her a voice, who had seen beauty in her light when no one else had. The one who had fought for her, risked everything for her. Before her, the first singers, the exiled ancestors of her people, offering her a place among them. A chance to understand what she was. A chance to reclaim a lost power that had been buried for generations. Her fingers twitched, light flickering at her fingertips as her thoughts warred within her. Marcus exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Elaya. I don't want to pressure you, but whatever you decide, I'm with you." Her eyes softened. She turned back to the first singers and wove a question into the air. "If I stay, what will happen?" The lead figure raised a hand, and shimmering symbols unfolded like blooming petals. "You will learn the songs of the lost. You will become as we once were." Another ripple of symbols. "You will be able to shape more than light, more than sound. You will shape reality itself." Elaya's breath caught. She glanced down at her hands. Already, she had done things no other Lyrevian could. She had moved herself and Marcus across the world in an instant, something even the elders of her people had never done. If she could learn more, if she could master it. A flicker of gold pulsed through her markings. The first singers were offering her more than a home. They were offering her power. But then her gaze drifted back to Marcus. Would he stay? Could he? She shaped another message. And what of him? The first singers hesitated. Then, at last, they answered. "He does not belong." Marcus tensed, but he said nothing. He already knew the answer. Elaya's chest tightened. She turned to him, searching his face for some sign of what to do. But Marcus only smiled that lopsided, tired smile, the one that told her he'd follow her anywhere, even if it meant losing her. "Elaya, I'll find a way back home," he said quietly. "You don't have to." She didn't let him finish. With a flick of her fingers, light spiraled around them both, forming a single, brilliant shape in the air. A symbol of choice. A symbol of them. Then, with finality, she turned back to the first singers and crafted her answer. "I will not abandon him." The air went still. For the first time, the first singer's light wavered, as if they had not expected her response. The lead figure raised a hand. "Then you choose exile once more?" Elaya straightened. And for the first time in her life, she did not fear the word. She lifted her hands, shaping one last message. "I choose my own path." The first singers made no move to stop them as Elaya and Marcus turned away. They walked in silence across the obsidian plains, Marcus casting occasional glances over his shoulder. I half expected them to try and kill us," he admitted. Elaya merely smirked, her fingers flicking a teasing shimmer of light in the air. Marcus chuckled. Right. Not their style. Still, tension lingered between them. Elaya had made her choice, but what now? They had no ship. No way off this planet. But even as Marcus opened his mouth to ask what came next, Elaya suddenly stopped. Her silver eyes widened, staring at the sky. Marcus followed her gaze, and his breath caught. The sky above them was splitting open. A great, jagged rift had formed in the darkness, its edges flickering with unstable energy. Through it, Marcus could see the faint, distorted image of another world, a vast structure of gleaming metal and shifting light, suspended in a swirling cosmic void. It was not of Lyrevian design, and it was watching them. A cold dread settled in Marcus's gut. Elaya, tell me that's your doing. She shook her head. Marcus swore. Then who the hell just opened a door to another dimension? A pulse of energy surged from the rift, followed by movement. Something was coming through. The air trembled. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Elaya as the rift in the sky pulsed again, widening like a wound torn in reality. Light bled from its edges, shifting erratically between colors that Marcus had no names for, unnatural hues that flickered like dying stars. Then, they emerged. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Figures drifted through the rift, their forms elongated and flickering, as if they weren't fully part of this world. They moved with eerie precision, their bodies wrapped in gleaming metallic exoskeletons, adorned with spirals of shifting light. Their faces, if they had faces, were obscured beneath smooth, reflective masks that mirrored the shattered sky above them. Marcus's heart pounded. He had seen many things in his time as an explorer, abandoned space stations, alien ruins, even hostile life forms. But this was different. These beings were watching them. Then movement. One of the figures raised a hand, and the air between them shimmered. A series of glowing symbols unfolded in midair, similar to the first singer's light language, but different, more structured, more rigid. Elaya inhaled sharply. She stepped forward and raised her hands, forming her own message of light in response. Marcus clenched his fists. Elaya? You know who these guys are?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained locked onto the symbols they had just displayed. Slowly, she shaped her reply in glowing fractals. A tense silence followed. Then, the lead figure moved forward. Unlike the others, its body radiated a strange energy, its form slightly blurred at the edges as if it wasn't fully stable. It lifted a single hand. And then, for the first time, a voice, cold, distant, layered, spoke. "You are the anomaly." Elaya flinched. Marcus took a step closer to her. "Hey, explain. Who the hell are you?" The figure's head tilted slightly, its mirrored mask reflecting Marcus's own confused face back at him. "We are the Ketheri, the keepers of order." The air vibrated with their words, though their mouths never moved. "This world was meant to be pure. Your presence has disrupted the balance." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Balance? What the hell are you talking about?" Elaya's fingers trembled as she formed a new message of light. "What do you want?" A pause. Then, the Ketheri's answer materialized in the air before them. To correct the divergence. To erase the anomaly. Their shimmering hands lifted. And then, they struck. Marcus barely had time to react before a wave of golden energy surged toward them. "Move," he shouted, grabbing Elaya's wrist and yanking her aside as the blast tore through the ground where they had been standing. A deep fissure split the obsidian plane, glowing with searing light. Elaya's mind raced. The Ketheri were unlike anything she had ever seen. In their power, it felt familiar, as if it came from the same source as hers. The first singers had told her that she had awakened something long forgotten, that she was not simply an outcast, but part of something greater. Had the elders of her people known about the Ketheri? Had they erased history not just to silence the first singers, but to hide from these beings? Another blast tore through the ground, sending shards of black stone into the air. Marcus swore under his breath. "Any chance we can talk this out?" Elaya's eyes blazed. "No." She lifted her hands, and light erupted around her, raw and untamed. It responded to her emotions, anger, fear, defiance, coalescing into jagged, shifting forms. And then, she struck back. A burst of violet and gold light surged from her fingers, colliding with the Ketheri's energy. The shockwave rippled outward, distorting the air itself. The lead figure staggered back, its form flickering wildly for a split second before stabilizing. The Ketheri hesitated. They had not expected resistance. Marcus grinned despite himself. "That's right, you shiny bastards. She's not just some anomaly. She's the goddamn future." The Ketheri didn't reply, but they no longer attacked. Instead, the lead figure raised a hand. The rift above them shifted. And then, a new shape emerged from the shimmering void. Something massive. Something ancient. A colossal construct, made of the same reflective metal as the Ketheri, descended through the rift. It pulsed with unfamiliar energy, its very presence distorting the gravity around them. And then, a single message appeared in the air. "If you will not surrender, you will be rewritten." Elaya's hands trembled. She had spent her entire life fighting to be heard, fighting to exist. Now, these beings, these keepers of order, wanted to erase her entirely. Her fingers curled into fists. No, she would not let them decide her fate. She turned to Marcus, her silver eyes filled with fierce determination. He smirked, cracking his knuckles. "So, what's the plan, Lightbringer?" Elaya took a deep breath. Then, she lifted her hands and opened a rift of her own. The Ketheri recoiled. The great construct above them pulsed violently, its light flickering with uncertainty. The first singers had told her she had awakened something long forgotten. Now, she was about to show the Ketheri exactly what that meant. Marcus reached for her hand. "Let's show these bastards what an anomaly can really do." Elaya smiled. And together, they stepped through the rift, into the unknown. The moment Elaya and Marcus stepped through a rift, the universe folded. Marcus felt his stomach twist inside out, his body weightless and heavy all at once. Colors that didn't exist bled into the void around them, stretching into endless spirals of shifting light. Elaya's grip on his wrist tightened, anchoring him as reality bent around them. Then, impact. They hit solid ground. Marcus groaned, his senses reeling. The air smelled electric, thick with something he couldn't name. He pushed himself up, blinking rapidly to adjust to his new surroundings. They stood in a vast chamber, its walls made of smooth obsidian, pulsating with veins of golden light. Enormous structures floated in the air, spiraling glyphs of pure energy, shifting between patterns like a living language. The place hummed, as if it were alive. Elaya staggered beside him, her silver eyes wide. This was not a place of the Lyre-Vine. And it was not built by the Ketheri, either. It was something older. A deep vibration rumbled through the chamber, and then, a voice. Not spoken, not heard. Felt. The divergence has returned. Marcus's breath hitched. The words resonated inside his skull, bypassing language itself. He turned to Elaya, and from the way she stiffened, he knew she had heard it, too. A massive shape stirred in the shadows. And then, it emerged. From the depths of the chamber, a being unlike anything Marcus had ever seen drifted forward. It was enormous, towering over them, its form wrapped in shifting layers of light and shadow. Its body was humanoid in the vaguest sense, but its limbs elongated and shifted as if it were made of pure energy. Its face was an ever-changing fractal, shifting between 1,000 unreadable expressions in the span of a second. More figures moved behind it, similar but smaller, their luminous bodies humming in perfect synchronization. Elaya's hands trembled as she lifted them, weaving a message in glowing script. Who are you? The towering being tilted its head. And then it answered. We are the architects. The word resonated through the chamber like a forgotten echo. Marcus swallowed hard. Architects of what, exactly? A pause. Then, new symbols unfolded in the air. The first singers. The Ketheri. The Lyre-Vine. All were shaped by our design. Marcus's heart pounded. You created them? The architects did not deny it. Instead, they gestured to Elaya. But you are not as we made you. Elaya's breath caught. She lifted her hands again, forming a rapid sequence of light. What am I? A low hum rippled through the chamber. The lead architect reached out, its elongated fingers grazing the space above Elaya's head. For a brief second, her markings flared, not in her usual luminous hues, but in deep, primal shades of violet and gold. The architects observed her reaction, then wove a single message. You are the divergence. Elaya frowned. What does that mean? A pause. Then, new symbols unfolded before them, this time, an image instead of words. And what they saw made Marcus's blood run cold. A war. Not of soldiers, not of weapons, but of sound. The first singers and the Ketheri locked in an eternal battle of creation and control. The Lyre-Vine silencing their own ancestors, choosing harmony over chaos. And above it all, the architects, watching, guiding. Then, a single figure appeared at the center of it all. Elaya. Or rather, something like her. A being wrapped in raw, unshaped light. A force that did not belong to any of them. A force that had the power to unmake their reality. Marcus sucked in a sharp breath. Elaya. I think they're saying you're some kind of mistake. Elaya's eyes darkened. She lifted her hands, her gesture sharp, demanding. Then why do I exist? The architect's response was immediate. Because the song was never meant to end. The walls of the chamber pulsed, shifting the images around them. The past and present blended, the architect's design stretching across time itself. And finally, the truth unfolded. The Ketheri had once been servants of the architects, meant to maintain order. The first singers had been the opposite, a force of raw creation, chaos incarnate. The Lyre-Vine had chosen to suppress that chaos, creating a culture built entirely on controlled harmony. But in doing so, they had severed something essential. A force meant to bridge the two. A force that had never been born until Elaya. Marcus exhaled. You were never supposed to exist, but now that you do. I matter, Elaya finished aloud. The architects regarded her in silence. Then, they wove a final message. You must choose the fate of the song. And just like that, Marcus understood. Elaya was the missing note. The final piece in a war between order and creation. If she chose the Ketheri's path, she would erase the first singers forever. If she chose the path of the singers, the Ketheri's rigid control would shatter, plunging the universe back into raw chaos. Or she could forge a new path. But whatever she chose, it would reshape reality itself. Marcus turned to her. So, what's it gonna be? Elaya hesitated. Then, for the first time, she truly spoke, not through light, not through translation. She sang. Not harmony. Not discord. Something new. The architects flinched. The walls rippled. The energy of the chamber shifted. And then, reality itself began to change. Elaya's voice was unlike anything that had ever existed before. It was not the perfect, structured harmony of the Lyrevian. It was not the rigid control of the Ketheri. And it was not the wild, unrestrained power of the first singers. It was something entirely new. Her song resonated through the chamber, a ripple in the very fabric of existence. Light swirled around her, responding to the sound, not just bending reality, but rewriting it. The walls of the chamber pulsed, shifting between forms, as if uncertain of what they were supposed to be. The architects recoiled. Impossible. But it was happening. Marcus took a step back, watching in stunned eyes. Elaya's entire body became engulfed in luminous energy. The golden and violet hues of her markings flared, expanding beyond her form until they filled the space around them. Then, the universe listened. Chapter 23, A World Remade. The rift in the sky trembled. The great Ketheri construct still hovered above, waiting, watching, but it did not act. It could not act. Because Elaya was not fighting against it. She was undoing the war itself. Her song wove itself through the fabric of the conflict that had shaped her world for eons, untying the knots of history, unmaking the choice between control and chaos. Instead of one or the other, she created balance. A world where the first singers were not silenced. A world where the Ketheri did not erase. A world where creation and order could exist together. The architects trembled under the weight of it, their shifting forms glitching in and out of focus. They had never intended for this. And yet, they had never heard a song like this before. The lead architect raised a hand, and instead of another message of warning, a new set of symbols unfolded in the air. The divergence is no longer broken. The song is whole. And just like that, the war was over. The rift in the sky began to close. The Ketheri shimmered once, then vanished, their construct dissolving into the void. The remnants of the first singers who had been trapped in exile shifted, their glowing forms stabilizing as if they had always belonged in this reality. Because now they did. Elaya had rewritten existence. And it was beautiful. Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. Okay, I have no idea what just happened, but I think we won. Elaya turned to him, the glow around her slowly dimming. For the first time, her silver eyes were not filled with hesitation, not filled with sorrow. She was whole, and she had chosen herself. Marcus grinned, stepping closer. So what now? Do you, want to rule the universe? Become a goddess? Personally, I'd vote against the goddess thing, but hey, your call. Elaya laughed, an actual laugh, before shaking her head. Then, she lifted her hands and shaped a final message in light. I just want to go home. Marcus blinked. Home. Elaya nodded. And with a simple flick of her fingers, she opened a new rift. Not one made of chaos. Not one made of war. One made of choice. Marcus chuckled. You know, I never thought I'd be happy to leave an ancient alien dimension, but here we are. Elaya smiled. Hand in hand, they stepped through, back to the world she had once been cast from. A world that was finally ready to hear her song. The Lyrevian halls had once been a place of judgment, of exile. Now, they were filled with light. Elaya stood at the center of it all, her hands raised, weaving sound and color into a symphony unlike anything her people had ever heard. The elders, the young ones, even those who had once scorned her, they listened. For the first time, they understood. Marcus leaned against a nearby pillar, arms crossed, watching with a satisfied smirk. Told you they'd come around. Elaya turned, catching his gaze, and gave a small, knowing smile. She had found her voice. And now, she would never be silenced again.